My name is Josephine, and I am 49 years old. My life is a carefully constructed masterpiece of order and quiet success. Built from the ashes of a past I have spent 30 years trying to forget. My son, Felix, is the sun in my universe, the one good, pure thing that came after the darkness. He is 24, kind, brilliant, and the only family I have ever truly claimed. So when he told me he had met someone, that he was in love, my heart swelled with a joy so fierce it felt like a physical presence in my chest. He was bringing her over for dinner, and I had spent the entire day in a state of happy anticipation, preparing his favorite meal, choosing the perfect bottle of wine. Her name was Ivy. She was lovely, intelligent, warm, with a laugh that filled the quiet corners of my large, minimalist house. She looked at my son with such genuine adoration that all my maternal anxieties melted away. They were perfect together. As the evening wound down, Felix went to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Ivy and me alone on the patio, the scent of jasmine heavy in the cool night air. We were making small talk, sharing stories. She told me she was adopted, raised by wonderful parents in a small town upstate. Then she pulled out her phone, her expression soft with a daughter's love. "They gave me everything," she said. "I don't have many pictures from when I was really little, but this is the only photo I have of my birth mother. My adoptive parents were given it to me by the agency." She turned the screen toward me, and my world, the one I had so carefully built, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The girl in the photo, a teenager with haunted eyes and a defiant chin, clutching a newborn baby wrapped in a generic hospital blanket, was me. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I continue this story, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see how a single photograph can unravel a lifetime of secrets. My life now bears no resemblance to the one I was born into. I am the owner of a successful interior design firm, sought after for my clean lines and serene, light-filled spaces, a direct rebellion against the oppressive mahogany and velvet darkness of my childhood home. I live in a house I designed myself, a place of glass and steel and open air, a fortress of tranquility. My relationship with my son, Felix, has been the central pillar of my existence. His father, a brief, kind-hearted mistake from my early 20s, had wanted to travel the world, not raise a child. We parted amicably, and I raised Felix alone, pouring all the love I was never given into him. He is my greatest creation, my proudest achievement. My own parents, Bartholomew and Eleonora Sterling, are relics from a life I've tried to erase. They reside in the family's ancestral stone mansion on the East Coast, presiding over a dwindling fortune and an ironclad set of social rules. To them, legacy and bloodline are everything. Appearance is paramount. Their love was conditional, a reward for academic achievement, for choosing the right friends, for conforming to their rigid expectations. I, with my artistic temperament and independent spirit, was a constant low-grade disappointment. They wanted a lawyer or a banker. They got a designer. They wanted a daughter who would marry into another powerful family. I gave them a son out of wedlock and raised him on my own. We speak twice a year, on Christmas and my birthday, stilted 5-minute conversations that are more of a formality than a connection. The secret I carried was from long before that. When I was 17, a senior in high school with a promising art scholarship on the horizon, I fell in love with a boy my parents deemed unsuitable. He was a musician, his hands calloused from his guitar and his future uncertain. We were young and careless, and I got pregnant. My parents' reaction was not of concern for their daughter, but of pure cold horror at the social disgrace. The scandal could tarnish the Sterling name. There was no discussion, no options presented to me. I was simply informed of the plan. I was pulled from school under the guise of a sudden illness and sent to live with a stern great-aunt in a remote part of the state. It wasn't a home, it was a holding cell. I spent the last 5 months of my pregnancy in isolation, forbidden from contacting my friends. The boy I loved was told I had moved away, his letters unanswered. The day I gave birth was the worst day of my life. I was in a small, sterile hospital, alone. I held my daughter for less than 5 minutes. I remember her scent, the impossible softness of her cheek. I remembered the single photo a sympathetic nurse took with a Polaroid camera before she was taken away. The agency, my parents had assured me, would place her with a good, anonymous family. I was returned home a week later, 10 pounds lighter, with a hollow ache in my soul that has never truly gone away. I was instructed to never speak of it again. The secret was to be buried, along with my daughter and my 17-year-old self. Now, 32 years later, that secret was staring at me from the screen of a smartphone held in the hands of the beautiful young woman my son intended to marry. The world narrowed to the small illuminated rectangle in Ivy's hand. The background of the photo was a pale institutional green, the exact color of the walls in that small, grim hospital. The blanket wrapped around the baby was a faded yellow with a pattern of small ducks, a detail I had replayed in my nightmares for years. And the girl holding the baby? Her face was thinner, her expression a mixture of terror and fierce, desperate love, but her eyes were undeniably mine. It was the only photograph of me from that entire year, a year my parents had otherwise systematically erased from every family album. "That's a beautiful photo," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant, as if it were coming from someone else. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. My daughter, the baby I had mourned for 3 decades, was alive, and she was sitting across from me. She was in love with my son, her brother. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow, and I felt the blood drain from my face. They couldn't get married. They were siblings. This beautiful, perfect love story was a biological impossibility, a tragedy of Greek proportions, and I was the only one who knew. "Are you okay, Josephine? You look pale." Ivy's voice was laced with concern, her brow furrowing. "Just a bit overwhelmed," I said, forcing a smile. "So happy for you and Felix. It's a lot to take in." Felix returned from the kitchen then, carrying a tray with coffee cups, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in our lives. "Everything all right?" he asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Your mom's just getting emotional," Ivy said, smiling at him. "It's sweet." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions, pouring coffee, making small talk, but my mind was screaming. I needed to tell them. I had to tell them immediately. But how? How do you tell your son that his fiancée is his sister? How do you tell this wonderful young woman who has just shown you a photo of her long-lost mother that you are that mother and that her dream of a future with the man she loves is impossible? Every time I opened my mouth to speak, the words caught in my throat. The potential for devastation was too immense. I would not only be breaking their hearts, but I would also be revealing the deepest, most painful secret of my life, a secret that would force me to explain the cold cruelty of my own parents. After they left, I collapsed on the sofa, my body trembling. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. Ivy's face, so open and full of hope. Felix's arm wrapped lovingly around her shoulders. The thought of destroying their happiness was unbearable, but the thought of letting this continue was unthinkable. I was trapped. For the next few days, I lived in a state of suspended panic. I canceled my client meetings, claiming a sudden flu. I barely ate or slept. I just paced my house, wrestling with the impossible dilemma. I needed a plan. I needed to be sure. The first step was to confirm the unthinkable. It was a long shot, but I still had the name of the adoption agency my parents had used, a discreet, private organization they had chosen for its ironclad confidentiality. I called them, my heart pounding. I explained in vague terms that I was a birth mother trying to get non-identifying information about a child I placed for adoption 32 years ago. The woman on the other end of the line was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, but without a formal request and a court order, I can't release any information. Our records are sealed." It was a dead end. I needed more than just a photograph. I needed proof. Then I remembered the boy, the musician. His name was Daniel. After my parents had sent him away, I never saw him again, but I remembered the name of his band. A quick search online brought me to a fan page, and from there to a recent article about a reunion tour. He was living just a few states away, taking a wild, desperate chance. I sent a message to the email address listed for his manager, explaining who I was and that I needed to speak with him about a matter of utmost urgency. While I waited, the pressure from Felix and Ivy mounted. They were bubbling with wedding plans, wanting to include me in everything. "We were thinking of a fall wedding, Mom," Felix said over the phone. "Ivy would love for you to help her with a design." Each happy, oblivious word was another twist of the knife. I made excuses, feigning a busy work schedule, buying myself a little more time. Then another complication arose. My parents. My mother called, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Josephine, darling, we hear congratulations are in order. Felix is engaged. We simply must meet the young lady. We're flying out next week." My blood ran cold. The architects of this disaster were about to walk right into the middle of it. Their presence would make an impossible situation catastrophic. They would take one look at Ivy with her familiar eyes and artistic spirit, and they would know. Or worse, they wouldn't, and they would treat her with their signature condescension towards anyone not of their world, inflicting a new kind of pain on the granddaughter they had thrown away. A day later, I got a reply. It was from Daniel himself. His number was at the bottom of the email. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. He answered on the second ring. His voice was deeper, rougher than I remembered, but it was him. We spoke for over an hour. I told him everything about the pregnancy, about my parents, about the daughter I was forced to give away. He was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. "I always wondered what happened to you," he finally said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "They told me you moved to Europe. I wrote you letters for a year. They all came back, returned to sender." The casual cruelty of my parents' deception still had the power to shock me. "Daniel, there's more," I said, my voice breaking. I think I found her." I told him about Felix and Ivy. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, filled with the weight of what I was implying. "There's one way to know for sure," he said quietly. "There was a genetic marker, a rare, harmless one that I have. It's called Gilbert syndrome. It can cause maljaundice under stress, but it's otherwise benign. My father had it. I have it. It's passed down. If she's our daughter, there's a strong chance she has it too. It would show up on a liver function test." The information was a lifeline. It was a concrete, scientific way to confirm what my heart already knew. Now, I just had to figure out how to get Ivy to a doctor without revealing why. It felt deceptive, manipulative, but what was the alternative? The next time Ivy came over for dinner, I put my plan into motion. I feigned a sudden, intense interest in health and wellness. You know, Felix, I was just reading an article about the importance of getting baseline blood work done in your 20s, I said, trying to sound casual. I'm going for my annual physical next week, and I think you both should come with me. Get everything checked out. My treat. Felix readily agreed, always one to humor his mother's health kicks. Ivy was more hesitant. Oh, that's really not necessary, Josephine. I'm perfectly healthy. I insist, I said, trying to infuse my voice with a light motherly authority. It would give me such peace of mind to know you're both starting your life together with a clean bill of health. She eventually, reluctantly, agreed. I scheduled the appointments with my own trusted physician, Dr. Lena Hansen, and privately called her beforehand, explaining the dire, unbelievable situation. I asked her to run a full liver panel on Ivy, specifically looking for the markers of Gilbert syndrome. The day of the physicals was one of the most stressful of my life. I sat in the waiting room, flipping through magazines, while Felix and Ivy were called back one by one. The wait for the lab results would be 48 hours, 2 days of holding my breath. During that time, my parents arrived. They swept into my pristine house like a storm, my mother immediately starting to criticize my choice of minimalist furniture, my father questioning the financial viability of my business. They were exactly as I remembered them, imperious, judgmental, and utterly self-absorbed. So, this is the young woman who has captured our grandson's heart? My father, Bartholomew, said when Felix brought Ivy over to meet them. He looked her up and down as if inspecting a piece of livestock. Her family, what do they do? My father is a retired history teacher, and my mother is a librarian, Ivy replied, her chin held high. I could see her bristling at his tone. How quaint, my mother, Eleonora, said, with a small, dismissive smile playing on her lips. And what about your biological family? Do you know anything about them? The question was a direct hit, a casual cruelty designed to put Ivy in her place. I know that my mother loved me enough to want a better life for me. Ivy's answer was filled with a quiet dignity that made me prouder than I could have imagined, but the confrontation was a clear sign of what was to come. My parents would not make this easy. They would pick and pry and judge until they found a weakness to exploit. The clock was ticking. The call from Dr. Hansen came on a Friday afternoon while I was in my studio trying to lose myself in the blueprints for a new client's home. Josephine, I have the results. Her voice was grave. I'm looking at Ivy's liver panel. It's conclusive. Her bilirubin levels are elevated in a way that is a classic indicator for Gilbert syndrome. There is no doubt in my mind. She is Daniel's daughter. She is your daughter. I closed my eyes, the confirmation washing over me, not with relief, but with a profound, soul-deep sorrow. The last shred of hope that this was all a terrible coincidence was gone. It was real. Thank you, Lena, I whispered. What are you going to do? I have to tell them. Tonight. That evening, I asked Felix and Ivy to come over. I told them I had something important to discuss. I also called my parents and insisted they be there as well. The atmosphere in my living room was thick with unspoken tensions. My parents sat stiffly on one sofa, Felix and Ivy on the other, holding hands. I stood by the fireplace, the Polaroid photo from the hospital and a copy of Ivy's lab results in a folder in my hands. I felt like an executioner. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "There is no easy way to say this. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, and it will change everything." I turned to Felix and Ivy first, my heart aching for the pain I was about to cause them. "Felix, Ivy, your wedding? It can't happen." Felix laughed, a short, confused sound. "Mom, what are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke?" "I wish it were. The reason you can't get married is that you are brother and sister." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Felix stared at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Ivy's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. My parents exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. They knew. In that instant, I knew that they knew exactly who Ivy was. That's impossible," Ivy whispered. "I'm adopted. We're not related." "Ivy, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I walked over her and handed her the folder. "A few weeks ago, you showed me a photograph of your birth mother. This is the original." She looked down at the faded Polaroid, then back up at me, her eyes filled with shattering confusion. "And these are the results of a lab test you took this week. They confirm our biological relationship." She scanned the papers, her breath catching in a sob. Felix looked from the photo to me, his face ashen. "Mom, what is going on?" Before I could answer, my father stood up, his voice booming with false authority. "This is preposterous. Josephine, what kind of sick, twisted game are you playing? You're trying to sabotage your own son's happiness." "Is that what you call it, Father?" I said, turning to face him, my sorrow hardening into a long dormant rage. "Or are you just trying to bury a secret you buried 32 years ago?" I told them everything then. I told them about Daniel, about the pregnancy, about being sent away. I told them about the sterile hospital room and the baby who was taken from my arms. I told them how they had sworn me to a lifetime of silence. As I spoke, Felix's gaze shifted from me to his grandparents, his expression morphing from confusion to disgust. Ivy was openly weeping now, her body shaking. "We did it to protect you," my mother, Eleonora, cried, her composure finally breaking. "We did it to protect this family. You would have ruined your life. We gave that child a chance at a better life." "You didn't give her a chance. You threw her away," I shouted, my own control finally snapping. "You threw us both away. You were so obsessed with the shame, you never once considered the human cost. You never thought that maybe 30 years later, the universe would have a reckoning, that my son and my daughter would find each other and fall in love because the only thing stronger than your pride is the bond you tried to sever." Felix stood up, his hands clenched into fists. He walked over to his grandparents, his face a mask of cold fury. "You knew? You knew who she was this whole time? When you met her, you knew she was the baby you forced my mother to give up?" "We suspected," my father admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "She has your mother's eyes." "And you said nothing?" Felix's voice was dangerously quiet. "You were going to let us get married." "We were evaluating the situation," my mother stammered. "Deciding on the best course of action to minimize the damage." "The damage to what?" he spat. "To our lives or to the precious family name?" He turned and walked over to Ivy, kneeling in front of her. He gently took her hands. "Ivy, I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. He then looked at me. "And Mom, I can't even imagine what you've been through." He stood up and faced his grandparents one last time. "Get out," he said, his voice flat and final. "Get out of my mother's house and get out of our lives." My parents, for the first time in their lives, seemed to have no words, no arguments, no manipulations left. They looked small and old and defeated. They gathered their things in silence and walked out the door, closing it softly behind them. The three of us were left in the wreckage, a strange, broken, and completely new kind of family. The days and weeks that followed were a landscape of grief. There was no easy path forward, no simple solution to the mess my parents had created. Felix and Ivy's love story, so beautiful and pure, was over. They had to mourn the future they had planned together, a loss as profound as any death. At the same time, Ivy had to process the fact that the woman she knew as her future mother-in-law was, in fact, her biological mother. And I had to navigate the surreal reality of having my daughter back in my life, a daughter who was in love with my son. They moved into separate rooms in my house, unable to be apart, but incapable of being together in the way they had been. The house was filled with a heavy, sorrowful silence. I tried to give them space, making quiet meals they barely touched, offering comfort that often felt inadequate. There were late-night talks, tears, and angry, unanswerable questions directed at the universe. It was a slow, painful process of untangling their identities from couple to siblings. Felix, with his innate kindness, focused on Ivy's well-being. He was her staunchest protector, her brother, in a way that was both new and fiercely immediate. He helped her navigate the difficult phone call to her adoptive parents, who were as shocked and heartbroken by the news as anyone. Ivy, in turn, began to look at me with a sort of hesitant curiosity. We started talking, not about the catastrophe, but about small things. Her childhood, her love of history, her dream of opening a small bookstore someday. I told her about my passion for design, about the struggles of raising Felix on my own. We were two strangers, a mother and a daughter, cautiously circling each other, trying to build a bridge across 32 years of silence. One evening, about a month after the revelation, Ivy found me in my studio, looking at old photographs. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly from the doorway. "Of course." "Daniel, my father, what was he like?" I told her about him, his music, his gentle spirit, his rebellious streak. As I spoke, I realized she had inherited his quiet intensity, just as she had inherited my eyes. "Would you ever want to meet him?" I asked, my heart pounding. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I think I would." I called Daniel. He flew out the next week. The meeting between him, Ivy, and me was awkward and beautiful and profoundly healing. He brought his old guitar and played her the songs he'd written for me all those years ago. He told her stories about their brief, intense love, and he apologized for not fighting harder for me, for us. In him, Ivy found another piece of her story, another connection to the past she had never known. While we were slowly, painstakingly building our new family, my old one was imploding. My parents, Bartholomew and Eleonora, had retreated to their stone mansion in disgrace. The story had, of course, gotten out. The high society world they valued so much was merciless. They became social pariahs, the subjects of whispered gossip at the country club. My father's law firm partners forced him into an early retirement to avoid the scandal. My mother's charities quietly removed her from their boards. The legacy they prized above all else was now a legacy of shame. They had lost everything they cared about, not because of what I had done, but as a direct result of their own actions 32 years prior. 6 months after the revelation, we held a small private ceremony in my garden. It wasn't a wedding, but a different kind of commitment. It was a ceremony of family. Felix, Ivy, Daniel, and I stood together, along with Ivy's wonderful adoptive parents who had flown in to be with us. We lit candles, we shared stories, and we made promises. Not as husbands and wives, but as parents and children, as siblings and as friends. We promised to be honest, to be kind, and to always choose love over pride. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I looked at the faces around me. My son, my daughter, the man I had first loved, and the kind couple who had raised my daughter with the love I couldn't give her. It was a strange, unconventional, and utterly beautiful family, forged in the crucible of a painful truth. My life today is richer and more complex than I could have ever imagined. Felix and Ivy have navigated their new relationship with a grace that astounds me. They are the closest of siblings, their bond forged in the unique fire of their shared history. Felix is now in law school, determined to become a different kind of lawyer than his grandfather. Ivy, with a small loan from Daniel and me, has just opened her dream bookstore downtown. It's called The Next Chapter, a name we all agreed was perfect. Daniel and I have not rekindled our romance, but we have found a deep and abiding friendship, united by our shared love for our daughter. I still run my design firm, but my priorities have shifted. My work is still important, but my family, this new, sprawling, complicated family, is my anchor. My parents have tried to reach out once or twice, with letters filled with self-pity and blame. I have not responded. Some doors once closed are meant to stay that way. The greatest lesson I have learned is that secrets are not walls that protect us. They are prisons that keep us from the truth. The truth, when it came out, was devastating, but it was also liberating. It freed us all from the lies that had defined our lives for so long. It was a painful, messy, and ultimately beautiful truth, and it gave me back the daughter I thought I had lost forever. Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? How did you navigate the fallout? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about the complex and often surprising nature of family. Remember, the truth can be painful, but it is always the first step towards healing. Thank you for listening.